I'm going to date myself. So welcome to the July meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. Do I have a motion to approve the June minutes?
Yeah,
I'll make the
I'll,
motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we're going to start. There's Eduardo, I hope. I think so. Well, hopefully he'll come on. So there he
Yes.
is. Terrific. So we are going to start talking tonight. As everyone knows, we asked H2M to look at to do a first phase wastewater management study. And part of the first task was to set the boundaries of the sewer district. I think one of the things we talked about at the last meeting was we asked them to look at it in two parts: a phase one, which hopefully is in a more immediate service area, and then a phase two, which is the sort of larger sewer district, proposed sewer district. So with that, I'm going to ask Nick to start. We're going to walk through this step by step because there's a lot of issues within this. I should say, this is very high priority for the trustees. They really would like to move something by the end of the summer. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Nick, who is hopefully live.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul. So I will share my screen because I think the map overview is going to help everyone better understand what we're talking about. Okay. Everyone see that? My sheet.
Yeah.
So just to circle back, Paul alluded to us getting re-engaged to reevaluate the downtown and surrounding areas for sewer service. What I'm showing here is a red boundary. You guys are probably familiar. That was the original boundary when we had done the prior study. As far as a phase one area, I haven't pinpointed it down yet, but what I'm showing on this map is this green highlighted area between Job's Lane and Nugent on Main Street. This was something in conversation that I was able to pull from as really a priority area, should be considered for phase one. Follow-up conversations with Paul alluded to the fact that maybe not only Main Street, but Main Street and Job's Lane should be phase one. So what I'm showing here is a 1A and a 1B. The reason why I'm doing these highlights separate right now is just to provide flexibility until we can finalize what we're really going to focus on from the standpoint of preliminary planning for infrastructure and analysis of alternatives on how you're going to treat the flow. So in addition to that, within this core area, I had looked at also potentially considering the inclusion of the properties that abut Nugent Street over here. And also on the map for your reference, I've highlighted the Southampton Elementary School because I know that's been a topic of consideration, as well as Town Hall, Southampton Hospital, and the treatment plant portion of the property are also highlighted. And what I want to also draw your attention to is highlighting this area, which was originally considered about 5 years ago for siting of a treatment facility, but has since been purposed for emergency response building. And more recently, I think this property up here, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong,
That's
correct.
This is property that's been identified as a potential siting of a treatment facility too.
Yes.
And again, these are alternatives that align with doing centralized collection and treatment. There's other innovative systems that we're also going to be evaluating for comparison to see what really makes sense for the village. That said, in addition to these three areas here within the original core service area, if you will, which is the red boundary. Talking to Paul, it made sense to at least take consideration of bringing in the properties around the lake. The lake is the crux of the environmental issue in the village, and adding properties around the lake to take away their sanitary flow from discharging to the lake is something that would, I think it would garner support from an environmental standpoint as far as applying for grant money goes. So this was something that was also taken into consideration preliminary, as well as extending up North Sea Road to County Road 39. What would it be if we were to include these properties? So again, this is very rough and preliminary. I haven't done anything more than project sanitary flows. I do have parcel counts. That's what's summarized here in this sheet. So the properties that abut Main Street Phase 1A, just to give you an idea, that would be on the order of about 25,000 gallons a day when you're considering treatment, both central and some type of innovative system on site, which I don't think these properties really lend themselves to that type of system because of the density that you have there. To give you an idea of what that density is, and I apologize, some of these labels are wrong. So the top is a parcel count, second row is actual acreage, third row is your flow, and the fourth row is gallons per day per acre. And I'll correct that if you want me to send this as follow-up.
Yes.
The Phase 1B area is 37 parcels, almost double the area than the green properties up here in Phase 1A. And it's about half the flow. So you have about half the flow density, or less than half the flow density that you do up here. And it's apparent because you have a lot of unbuildable space there. It's a lot of parking lot space that you're factoring into that. Up around Nugent is 28.
By the way, I'm sorry, Nick,
Yep.
I apologize. That's actually Hampton Road.
Oh, up on this side of Main Street?
Yeah.
Hampton Road. All right. I apologize for. So
Sorry.
in Hampton Road, you have about 28. Well, you have 28 parcels, just under 7 acres, just under 10,000 gallons a day, and you're around 1,400 gallons a day per acre. And the reason why I'm highlighting the flow densities here is because Suffolk County Sanitary Code goes off that. So your groundwater management zone here places you in a region that, if you were to build new, it would allow a density of 300 gallons a day per acre. So when you ratio that to these, you could tell these really high dense areas far exceed 300 gallons a day per acre. The interesting point is when you look at the properties abutting the lake, they're within density, actually. They meet current density. However, the sensitivity to the lake and their systems discharging to the lake is of concern when you're looking to remove nitrogen underflow from groundwater. The properties up here that go up North Sea Road, again, they're relatively low density because there is undevelopable land there that's taken into account. And it reduces that flow density. And the Phase 2 area is the remaining properties within the original service area boundary that I didn't highlight as a subset phase. And that's another 108 parcels that make up this pink color. It's about 68 acres, about 87,000 gallons a day, and you have a flow density right around 1,300 gallons a day per acre. So these are the areas that we're looking at, I think, from an ultimate build out standpoint in terms of what potentially could be sewered with infrastructure, meaning, sewer mains, pump stations, centralized treatment, and all these other properties in gray here, and which is why I have this inlaid map, shows the entire extent of the village. By nature of creating a sewer system, it technically would encompass the entire village, and everyone else in that district would and I know there's already policies in place that, it incentivizes people if they do need to change their systems, if they're going to do an improvement on their property, to go down the path of putting one of those innovative alternative on-site wastewater treatment systems. So I think the thought here moving forward, regardless of what we're going to do in this area where we're going to evaluate cluster systems or centralized treatment, I think part of the overall map and plan needs to align with the town of Southampton's program through CPF, where it's trying to incentivize people to upgrade their on-site systems to these IA type systems to reduce the amount of nitrogen that's getting discharged through their sanitary disposal systems.
I can ask a question. I'm just phase 1D. I see
Yes.
there's 183 parcels. That would probably make it a lot more complicated and expensive to cover. I mean, just that one phase, just that one area has as many parcels as all the other ones together, right?
Correct. Yeah, you're talking about 1D, which is
Yeah.
these. Yeah, because again, those properties are relatively large. So when you look at that, yeah, it does add costs. When you start looking at the density and you start looking at areas that are less dense, that means you have further distance to actually connect people if you're going to try and put some type of centralized system in place.
Distance and numbers too. 183 parcels versus, add them
Yep.
all up, you have maybe 250 parcels.
And that's kind of, and I didn't drill down too far on this, and I apologize again for the formatting where these are mislabeled, but it was trying to show the higher the density is really where you want to start, because that's where you're going to get the
Right.
most bang for the buck in terms of an investment in infrastructure.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
So Nick, if you took 1A, 1B, and 1C,
hmm
that gets you currently, is this current flow, but by the way?
Yeah,
Or potential flow?
these flows are current based
Uh-huh.
on the inventory of what we saw out there.
Right. So that gets you,
It'll 1A, 1B, and 1C is around 45,000 gallons a day.
right. And do we know how much unused capacity there currently is at the hospital plant?
Yeah, well, the hospital plant over the past, I'd say 2 years, has averaged around 25 to 27,000 gallons a day, and they're permitted at 104,000 gallons a day.
So there
So-
is, in theory at least, if it's putting aside 100
Yeah.
other issues, in theory there's sufficient capacity there for phase 1, if you will.
Yeah, if we were to consider phase 1 being 1A, B, and C,
Right.
yeah, technically based on the flow that's been generated at the hospital relative to what they're permitted to handle,
Right.
it seems as though that those three boundaries could fit into the additional, the what appears to be available capacity at the hospital.
Wouldn't phase 1E also fit in there?
1E,
Next-
another
Yeah,
9,
wouldn't phase 1E fit in that capacity?
1E potentially could, because that's another 10,000 gallons a day, which would bring it up to 55. And the only thing is 1E is non-contiguous to the rest of the area, and it's it's a distance down the road that you would have to go to install pipe and everything else to connect the flow down towards the hospital. If the hospital was, feasible and the option that seemed to make the most sense.
Right. So I guess one thing that's very helpful for me, at least, from this is understanding the density of Main Street and Jobs Lane, and how much, that's really, if you think of the amount of flow that's being created and the issues in the lake, those really jump out. Obviously 1D also has a lot of flow, but that's over.
No, I misspoke. I'm
many
sorry.
times
I meant to
a day.
say phase 2. The pink and the
Oh,
purple
okay.
have me
Right.
confused.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Phase 2, no. With the phase 2 alone, if you just look at the pink area alone, that's about 87,000 gallons a day.
So,
That by itself would exceed the apparent available capacity within the hospital's
Okay.
treatment
All
plant.
right.
I'm going to
Nick,
change.
and these are all current. So I also note this does not provide for, if it were to become more dense.
Yeah, again, these are current based on county
Right.
health department
Yep.
design criteria.
Right, right.
So they're not based on actual water use. So when we did an inventory of the properties, there were some that have apartments that could be vacant.
Right.
So we did account for that, and we were projecting that. It doesn't take into account the full as of right development if the
Mhm.
density restrictions were alleviated.
Right.
And could you model this and try to forecast approximately what would be the flow based on the maximum development potential?
We would have to do a zoning analysis, depending on how detailed it would need to be. But I mean, we can put factors in here to account for, because again, zoning means you're allowed to do X. There's many different things that could happen within X, and you're not going to have everyone building out to the max on adjacent properties. So we can
Well-
probably put together something that would give a good projection on what you could anticipate in terms of future growth from a sanitary flow perspective.
There is, and Nick, I can help you find it. There is, when the VB district was approved,
Mm-hmm.
the revised VB district, there were analyses of how much would be built based on that. So we could use it at least for the VB district, which not everything on this map is in, but obviously some of the central parts
Okay.
of that.
That would definitely help. So at least I had something
Right.
to tie specifically to.
Right. Joe, were you about to say something?
No, I was not. No.
Okay. Other questions, comments on this map? So let me maybe make a few and then other people can discuss. So, when one thing that we've been working on is trying to link this to, Nick, is there a way to make this grid bigger?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, you know what? The map will go away. I'll maximize my
Fine,
screen and
fine.
zoom in so you could see it.
That would be very helpful. Great. Little too big. Okay.
That's good?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes. So, one thing we've been trying to do is to link this to the work that the Clean Water Committee is doing, and looking at the various studies, particularly the ones that Chris Gobler has done and recently updated. The two big factors, not the only factors, as we know, there are many factors, but two big factors on the lake that he identified were obviously, first of all, the flow from the Village Business District, and secondly, actually, was the flow from the houses around the lake. Now, there's the other option, obviously, or I shouldn't put it that way. Another option for the houses around the lake is for them all to be basically required to do IA systems. Many of them really have very ancient, by our standards, septics. Some of them 70, 80 years old. So, that's another approach. It doesn't have to be a centralized system. But I did think for analysis purposes, we should look at that, because if part of the goal here is to answer is to address the flow into the lake, you really have to look at everything, including 1D. The other thing I would report is, and others I think participating in this call can attest to, the town is re-engaged on the idea of trying to do something about town hall and about the school. So that's, we had looked at that many years ago. They were not particularly engaged on that at the time, but obviously everyone's in a different place several years later. So other questions, comments on the map?
I would just say that my one concern would be when we're talking and tying into the properties on the lake, that there's quite a few. Actually, most of them are flag lots. So my one concern would be to, I can just predict or foresee a issue with the neighbors and the piping and so forth. So that could be a issue we have to address with them. If that were to be. Oh, and also they also have a lot of the owners have already taken it upon themselves to upgrade. So let's not discount that some of them already have
Right.
invested tens of thousands of dollars into doing that.
Right.
So
Right.
Just curious,
And-
what's the, is there a big cost per gallon difference between a centralized system all in with pipes versus one of these IA or separate systems?
When you look at it, it all is relative to the area because the IA systems are per individual property. The bigger your service area, obviously, the more the infrastructure costs, but it gets spread out against more properties and more assessed value. It depends because I've seen different areas modeled where it's actually less per property long-term to do centralized treatment versus paying the cost for the IA system when you factor in the on-site restoration and everything else associated with doing the IA system. Because some of them, again, when you put them in, it doesn't just fit in the same location of your conventional system. It takes up more area and it results in more, disruption to the property. So,
But Nick, I'm presuming to sort of follow up from Eldon's question, if you looked at something like Town Hall,
oh, okay. Yeah, that would
right,
be.
you could definitely see an alternative for IA, right?
Yeah, properties like that, yeah. I could see that being cost effective.
Isn't that
And
what
the
they're doing at the Village Latch? An IA
I think,
system?
yeah, I think that is what they're putting putting in there.
Right. Let me ask a question that I always find hard to understand. If you allowed IA, would you then hook them up to the plant, or they would basically not be included with the plant if you had a plant eventually? I know that's a hard question to answer.
If you have a plan eventually
Yeah,
and they're within the district
right,
and they want to connect, I don't see why you would prevent them from connecting.
right. But
You know.
right, okay.
So if you're going to plan it, though, I wouldn't plan to have them do an IA just to eventually have them connect.
Right, I was gonna say, if you have an IA, why would you want to connect?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't understand that.
well, I believe 9 Main Street already did an IA. I believe they did an IA. I believe when they renovated, put a second floor on.
So the IA systems are not intended to allow increased density.
Right.
They're only intended to service your current density. The IA systems, and that's also why the CPF money that's available for them, CPF money is going towards projects that do not promote increased density. It's to promote environmental quality and water quality protection.
So something like Canoe Place Inn or something like that. Where they're building within the existing zoning.
If they're building within the existing density, yeah, if they're meeting density, they can put the IA in. But if you're going to exceed density, the IAs really aren't appropriate for that. You would have to go to an Appendix A treatment system or some type of connection to another sewer district somewhere else.
Right. I mean, the density and the allowable flow is directly related to the size of the property. So when you have a small property in the village, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you have a very small property on the village, the allowable flow is very small, so
Yeah.
you may not be able to put in, let's say, a pizzeria or any kind of wet use. Whereas, so even if you put an IA system, whereas if we connect to a central sewage treatment plant, at that point, there is no more that limitation for the density. And then you can go with zoning, and then you can go to build the maximum and have whatever is allowed in terms of zoning for the wet use.
Right.
Correct. That's why when you're looking at your downtown area, not only is space limited, but when you're talking about future growth, the IA systems don't really meet what you're looking to achieve there. In terms of allowing density to increase and also improving water quality. You can't have both, be with an IA. If you're going to sewer it and bring it somewhere centrally, you're going to be allowed to increase density while treating to a higher standard.
How large an area do you need for the IA for like the field? Because some of the say, Main Street properties have a very small backyard, if any backyard.
Well, it comes down to separation from groundwater, and you don't really have much elevation between grade and groundwater. So, technically after an IA system, you can put a leaching pool in. But if you can't maintain separation and you have a certain amount of flow that requires a certain amount of square footage, meaning the surface area or leaching pool, you could have a numerous amount of shallow leaching pools versus having a shallow drain field. And shallow drain field, to meet the square footage requirements, could require a significant amount of area. I don't have right at the tip of my fingers the metrics and the standards that you need to design to for the square footage, but it's based on a gallon per day per square foot.
So putting aside technology just for a minute, in terms of what do people think? And then I know there's some participants on the call, so I wanted to also ask if anybody else had any comments. But what do we think about the phase 1 ABC approach versus the rest? Because I think one of the things that I've heard from many of the trustees is great desire to get moving on at least an initial service area to begin to have some impact. Anybody have thoughts one way or the other about it?
I would start with Main Street.
Sorry?
Yeah, I would start with phase 1A. It's just
Right. Right.
Yeah, keep it as small as possible and see how it works. See what the response is.
I'm not sure. I would not. I would go the other way. I think it's best to go full speed and try to go full speed with a larger plan.
I
And
agree
then,
with you, Mark.
And then when we construct it, then we can construct in phases. But I think that it should be part of a master plan. I think that,
Okay.
the acquisition of that, when you look at the total amount of flow that Nick is proposing is around 211,000 gallons per day, which is not a very large flow. That plant at the location that's proposed could service other areas. I think that if we march all in that direction, then possibly we could then implement it. The phasing should be in the implementation, not in the planning.
I agree
Right,
with Mark.
maybe saying the same thing actually. So good point, Mark. I think we all agree. I think the plan would have all of the subsets in it, but might permit a smaller area to move ahead on a more rapid time frame. So you would say so take all of Nick's colors, other than the gray, and say that's our service district, but we have service district 1 or A or whatever we're going to call it, and that we're going to try to move on a more rapid basis. That was the idea.
Right.
It wasn't to say they're not going to be in the sewer district.
Well, if you build a new plant, you build.
I understood too.
It seems to me like if you were
Laura,
really
you were about to. Sorry, Laura, you were about to say something.
Well, if you're gonna build this plant over there on 39 or whatever, and you look at the map, so if you're gonna sink the lines or whatever, I mean, it's right there,
Exactly.
So then you add on as you need to,
Yes.
but it has to be big enough to take it all at some point, and even more at some point.
Yes, exactly. The one question that I had for Nick, I don't know why, did you exclude that condominium
Mark, that was considered when we did the original study because they have on-site treatment there.
Oh, the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was how they were allowed to build the density that they built there.
Okay.
Eldon, you were about to ask something?
I was wondering if you really played with this map, if you could utilize the hospital capacity plus AI on those parcels where it makes sense to
Right.
your capacity.
I agree with that. I think that's the safer way to go. I think my 2 cents obviously is I think we I understand where you're coming from, Mark, but people want this done yesterday, and I think what you're proposing, it sounds great, but that takes years, and people want a solution now versus 2 years from now. So that's my only, rebuttal to that. Is what you're proposing takes time versus what, phase one with the hospital would be more amenable, 6 months, a year from now versus 5 years.
About 10 years from now.
I'm a little confused as usual. Is the hospital actually a choice that we have? I mean, they're actually available for us?
Well,
There's
that's Paul. You can.
Let's let Nick
Paul,
answer.
but
yeah. The hospital, we're talking about scenarios that still need to be investigated.
Right.
I haven't communicated with the hospital yet. I know there is that Light Tower group that keeps presenting and talking about an opportunity. I need to get their detailed plan if they have one, because they keep referring to the hospital. There's conversations there, and you're right. It doesn't happen overnight. It does take time. I understand the community's need and desire to want this to happen fast, but you also are going to want to have a good plan in place. You don't want to rush something just to do something and then look back and say, well, we should have done something differently. So there's something to be said about proper planning here. You can have, if like you said, oh, can we move forward with a sewer plan, but have properties who have enough real estate to put IA systems there. But what's that property owner going to do when you run a sewer main eventually? They have an IA system, the guy next door connects, and then they're going to be like, well, I want to redevelop. I can't unless I connect.
Right.
So they're going to say, all right, well, because they can still invest the money now, but an IA isn't going to give them what they want in terms of increased density. It's just going to give them peace of mind that they're improving water quality.
I thought that present technology, though, would steer us toward doing a decentralized system instead of going to a central facility. And going to the hospital, by the way, is not a municipal facility, so that would present another problem as well. But shouldn't we be going decentralized?
Let me actually step in for a second. So I think there's two issues here. One is, what is the service area, and is there a more immediate service area? Let's put that as one side. The other side is what the available assets and technologies are.
Right.
So, so the first one, we had looked at a centralized plan several years ago. We have some sense how that gets done. It's sort of similar to what West Hampton's done, although they did hook into actually an existing facility at the airport. But it's the same idea of what they did, and theirs now is, I think, about to be.
I apologize, but I have to leave.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Second is, and Mark Schifrin has proposed a site, which is an interesting site up at, actually right outside the village border on 39. The second thing is that we've known for a while, obviously, that the hospital has a plan that is operating significantly below capacity. The hospital, when we did this several years ago, there was talk that the hospital might move someday. That's now underway, although, not 100% certain it's going to happen, but they're certainly raising money and doing plans, and they certainly anticipate they're going to move. So that plant is an asset that perhaps might be available. As Nick mentioned, there's a private group who has proposed a public-private partnership here, where they would use the hospital plant at least on an immediate basis. And then actually, is to say there are four things. Third is, we know that eventually, and again, this isn't eventually, and to Mark's point, whether or not we can rely on it, we don't know yet. But we know that eventually, when the hospital moves, they are going to be doing a wastewater plant on the college campus. And so there is the potential to joint venture or hook in with that. And then last, and not least, but certainly in the mix, as Eduardo is pointing out, The county is given a broader range to IA systems than it did 5 years ago. There's obviously the Canoe Place, there's Village Latch, there's a number of spots in the town where those have been done. They're usually been done for a focused project, if you will. So they're not based on future density, the next point. They're based on what is there today and allowing that to happen, whether it's at the Village Latch or Canoe Place. There's a plan, Reckler had a plan and they were building the plan and the IA was approved for that. But that's certainly something that, everyone has been aware of and certainly has been something that's been presented to the trustees and to us. I think just to make this a little sort of, because, we could, and I think we did 5 years ago, get caught in this thicket, is the first thing, and it's a little bit to Mark's point, is if we all think the service district makes sense, and we all think that the Nick's identification of the initial areas makes sense, then I think, Nick, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think your next step is to look at those areas and what the scenarios are for each of those areas.
But if I can add something, just going back to the map, I think that one area that will be worth looking into to possibly connect is the Hillcrest area, where you have very, very small lots that right now you could not legally put in a septic system. Some of those lots are so small that you cannot put in legally a septic system. So, and I think it would behoove us to possibly look into sewer and running a little main down Hillcrest and possibly connect all those houses there.
What happened to the cluster system idea?
Cluster is the IA, really.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Paul, I actually reached out to a few installers of the cluster, and they did say, not to contradict Nick's point, but they did say that if you have enough flow, you could change the use of that property from a dry use to wet use or what have you. And I do have one other question would be, technically, isn't the Reckler property more density, because they did add 38 condos versus the 2 restaurants that were there? So isn't that a higher density use in theory?
Well, let me actually put it a different way. If as it's been approved, they can't say, in 20 years we're going to build another 30.
Right. Yeah.
Or it's sized for what it is.
Correct.
And I think the IA system terminology is getting muddled a little bit too,
Right.
because they're using innovative treatment technologies, but it isn't an IA system in the sense of what an IA system is. It's actually a treatment plant,
Right.
that they're building there.
Yes. The other thing that I wanted to add also is that in terms of the hospital, see, the capacity that they have is directly linked to the number of beds. So if they have to give up capacity, they're going to have to give up beds. The fact that they are actually not physically using the water, the flow, it's sort of irrelevant. It's really related to the number of beds. For a certain number of beds, you need a certain capacity per the code.
Yeah, and Mark, that's right, because we had that conversation 5 years ago when we communicated with the health department as well as the hospital.
Right.
We did start going down that path, and then we realized it wasn't something that made sense. The only reason why we're bringing it up again is because we understand the hospital is eventually going to relocate to the Stony Brook campus.
Yes.
That property is going to sell. I don't know who's going to buy it or what they're going to repurpose it for. And part of it is, does the hospital want to, they can't separate the treatment plant from
Correct.
the actual hospital facility. They're covenanted together. You can't have the hospital there without the treatment plant.
Right.
And I think, Mark, in response, which you're right about, to what you said, I think one of the reasons they've been more restrained recently, maybe is the right word about that issue, is they've been very nervous recently about making a decision about their existing capacity until we're out of the health environment that we're in right now. So, normally their capacity in the winter is very small. Obviously, it was different this winter and could be different in the fall again. So I think they're taking a little bit of a pause, if you will, of their own, while they see how that works over the next year. But eventually, they're back in the same spot, which is they really don't they don't need the beds they have. They haven't occupied them in many years, and they are going to move. So I think what's changed, Mark, you're right in everything you said. The only thing that's really changed is they really do plan to move.
And also, to your point, Paul, according to the people at the hospital who I've spoken with, we've spoken with them. And then when we met with James Lima, is whoever buys the property will most likely tear the buildings down, at least the larger building that is the main building. So, because they say it's not salvageable, at least the majority of it is not. So, we really should be looking at that property as a blank slate in terms of a repurpose of the building, but that's up to a future owner or developer.
All right.
So.
Okay, I want to get to actions in a minute. Before I do any of the participants want to say anything? You don't have to, but if anybody wants to say anything before we move on.
I'm good.
Could I just add?
No, I meant the non-board.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Going once, going twice. Okay.
Paul, I do have one just planning.
Yeah, sorry.
It hasn't been articulated to me, like the exact purpose of this. Is it to allow more wet uses? Is it to just solve an existing environmental problem for existing properties with existing uses? Or is it to add uses or add density? I haven't seen that being defined anywhere.
Yeah, let me try to respond to that. And I think actually, Jolie, people are trying to speak.
Yeah, they are, but if they want to speak, they must raise their hand. Otherwise, I don't know that they want to talk, and I can't bring them up to be a panelist. So if you want to say something, you have to raise your hand, okay?
Okay.
So let me look at you guys, and who wants to speak? If you want to speak, please raise your hand. There's also a question on a Q&A. It says it's from an anonymous attendee.
Okay.
I can tell you that question. Can
Sure.
you please explain how we will incentivize individual homeowners, businesses to connect to the sewer system? That's
Okay, that's an excellent question. I think that's the next phase of work. We don't.
Okay.
That's not something that we know yet.
all right, and Frank McDonough would like to speak, so can
Okay.
I bring him up? Okay, hold on. Okay, you're ready to speak anytime. Think that you might be on mute and you have to start your camera as well. Mr. McDonough, can you start you unmute yourself.
Yep.
Perfect.
There you are.
Yeah, there you are.
Am I live now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So just a brief comment, and then I wanted to introduce Chris Robinson, who is working on our map and plan phase 1, and who is very well known to H2M, and with whom our organization also has a very strong relationship. Let me just say this before I defer to Chris. This has been a very thoughtful presentation that I've heard. Number 2, the questions asked are valid questions and are the right questions to be asked before anything proceeds. And then number 3, we are working to answer those questions, and I think we can answer them in a positive way and in a brief time frame. And I'm going to let Chris Robinson from R&M Engineers speak about what we're doing in terms of being able to complete and more fully address some of these questions. And we expect to be doing that quite rapidly over the next few weeks. Chris, do you have a few moments to speak, please?
Yes, sorry, I was just getting logged in. Yeah, thank you, Frank. to answer a couple of questions, we have been engaged by Light Tower to do the evaluation of the hospital plant to see what in fact is available, to look at their current occupancy of the hospital use, the size of the plant, the available capacity in it, so we can make more of a definitive answer of whether or not how much flow would be available for phase one. One of the comments I'd like to address to is that we do think that the phase one idea of getting this into the hospital plant, provided the capacity is there, is not mutually exclusive upon using the full-blown treatment plant at a later date, because we would build a pump station in the downtown to connect to the hospital treatment plant. That pump station could easily be rerouted and connected to the new village plant when it gets built up near 39, if that's the ultimate location to build it in. So that they would work very well, and this would be an excellent opportunity to get the core downtown village area sewered. And you can see from Nick's chart, most of those properties a lot of them are 10 times the allowable density of what's happening there if you look at the health department flow numbers. So be an excellent opportunity to get that kind of nitrogen out of the downtown and treat it at a full-blown plant.
Commissioner Travis, Chairman Travis, our view is that this is the first step. We are obviously in the business of remediation and nitrogen capture. We would be very interested, have expressed our interest, and continue to be interested in a site on the LIU campus, as well as some alternative site that might capture the east side of town. We don't see them as mutually exclusive. We see them as building upon each other. And the difference is, at a time when infrastructure is needed, we're available. We can move this forward rapidly. We would like to do it in full partnership with the village and the Planning Commission. Otherwise, we're not going to proceed. And so we think all of your thoughts are good. We think a phase one approach is thoughtful and can begin to address the issues raised in the New York State DEC report. And we can get that done rapidly and not in the 5 to 10 year time frame that other plans might take. So we're excited by this opportunity.
Thank you. I think Frank I think everyone on the commission knows in the audience, but I just want to make sure. Frank is with Light Tower Capital Partners, right?
Correct.
And that would be a public-private financing model. So
the way we look at it, Chairman Travis, is this is a utility structure, just like PSE&G, just like Verizon, just like National Grid. And this will be municipally led by the village. It would be executed by Light Tower. It would be accountable to the local business and residential community, and becomes a model for how we can begin to recapture the economic and ecological value on the South Shore.
Any of the other participants want to say anything?
Well, one question I have is, has Light Tower done such a project, in New York State or in?
I can say that our team of engineers, tax experts, developers, et cetera, have done over 100 billion of infrastructure projects over the last 30 years, including wastewater. And so we'd be happy to talk to you about that as we get further into the.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, let's hold on that for now. I want to focus this on the sewer district, but I did want to give Frank and his group a chance to talk about the work that they're doing.
We expect that we will be proceeding and have had conversations with the hospital in January and February, and as recently as today, about these discussions, and they will continue to engage with us, and we will continue to keep you posted on what happens. But our commitment is to move rapidly, to move thoroughly, to outperform the IA systems, which we think are at 20 mg, and we can get down below 10 in our systems. And I think there are ways we can take the excess capacity that are there, and with some adjustments, increase that so we could expand beyond phases A, B, C, and potentially D. without too much additional capital cost. So we're committed to doing that and doing it rapidly.
I have one question for if I may.
Yep.
So Frank, this is Joe McLaughlin. Would your what you're advising is, I guess what Eldon Scott and I are kind of advocating for, which is kind of the all the above approach. Is that really what you're kind of advising? Is the all the above approach, using the hospital and cluster and another sewer plant at a later date? Is that what you're advising? Or
I think there are many options here, and the perfect plan will be one where we all coalesce and come to an agreement. But the first step is to get this business district sewered, and we can also be looking at along the lake, town hall, and the school district. And I think Mark and Mrs. Davini have a very good idea on a newer plant. We think that's a very strong possibility. And we know that the town is very interested in a plant on the LIU site where the hospital would be building, and we would be very interested and have been talking to them about that as well. So this is not just one or none. It is
multifaceted.
Right. First step, baby steps.
Okay.
Good point, Joe.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other participants? Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can bring it.
There's a question I see on the that apparently not everyone can be heard out there.
I think that was Chris, actually.
There's one from, I see another one from Kimberly saying, how does phase 1A align with the town's WQIP high sensitivity area?
Nick, do you know that?
In terms of the town's water quality improvement areas, I think it is high priority. I have to look because I believe the town has revised the maps.
Good question.
I understand the town is in the process of revising their maps because their maps differ from the county's maps.
Right.
So that is a good question, and we need to look at that because it is important from a grant standpoint.
Okay, let me go back to Eldon's quick question before, which was an excellent question, certainly. So, so I think the goals here are as follows. Number one, there's an environmental issue that we need to address, which is the nitrogen from these uses, which is entering into the water system in the village. And one which, you know, both the town and particularly the county have been very clear in saying need to be addressed both here and throughout the county. And particularly throughout the South Shore. Second is to, as you mentioned, Eldon, in doing so, to get out of the current freeze from the Department of Health on further wet uses within the village. Which would allow other uses of existing properties on Main and Joves, for example, in the first phase, or Hampton Road for that matter. You know, that's been a goal, a long-term goal for the Planning Commission. Just as an example, many of the older buildings have what were residential units upstairs, for example, that they cannot use and are no longer able to be licensed, just as an example. Third, I think, is to address the potential for future growth in the village, because obviously at this point we have a number of vacant or significantly underutilized parcels, particularly, for example, on Nugent Street and Windmill Lane. We have a movie theater, which, you know, long-term is a fairly low density use of that parcel. Again, it would be very hard to do anything else on the movie theater side at this point. So those are all goals. I think the first two are really to address the environmental issues and allow further uses within existing buildings in the village. So, with that, I'd like to suggest, and Nick, tell me what you think is a realistic time frame. and we'll figure out how to do this on Zoom. But I'd like to suggest we do a second meeting to focus on this. And I think I'd like the second one to talk about a little bit about what the potential scenarios are. Do you have a sense, Nick, of when the next piece of your study might be ready?
A lot of it will rely on reaching out to Frank and Chris to see what they're looking at in terms of the hospital. As far as doing central versus decentralized, that's something that I can look at.
Right.
I would say by the end of the month, to keep it within the month of July,
Right.
would be a reasonable time frame.
Okay.
And I can commit, and Chris will commit to assist Nick. As I said, Dennis and the H2M team are good friends of ours, and we are happy to help find a common goal, help you reach your common goal and find a solution. And we will report back as a result of our conversations with the hospital promptly.
And I'm going to ask members of the Clean Water Committee to attend our next meeting, because this is obviously a very critical item in their list of the menu of things that they're looking at for Lake Agawam. And I should close this part of the meeting by saying, the trustees have been working extraordinarily hard in the last year to address issues relating to Lake Agawam where they can. There's been a good deal of work done, for example, on Job's Lane. There's been further funding from CPF, so a lot of good work has gone into starting this, really starting to address what have been long-term environmental issues for the center of the village. So with that, Nick, thank you for the presentation very much. And I think we're going to move on to the next item.
Thank you all very much. We're at your disposal. You can reach me, Mr. Chairman, or any of your folks. Let me give you my direct number if there are any questions. You can reach me at 917-691-7782. 917-691-7782. Thank you very much.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Just want to note, the village this last weekend did the first of experimenting with closing the streets on a Saturday night. I think it was a good test case, if you will, because obviously everyone's now thinking about what happened and what needs to be done to make it work better, but it's a good start. It certainly, this is obviously unusual summer, and while there's a lot of constraints, on the other hand, there's a very large audience of people out in Southampton this summer, and I think will be this fall. So it's an opportunity to try a few of these things and see how they work. Any comments about it on the commission?
I thought it was a very positive experiment and experience. The only thing that I thought was that maybe we could have handed masks to people. I thought there was the amount of people wearing masks were really not where it should have been. I also thought that the police, the way they had those cars flashing in the front, I don't know what the purpose it was. And I think that maybe the police could have been handing out masks and be a friendly police force, within the area.
Point. Okay.
I mean, I thought it was great. I guess I did hear the same thing about safety and making sure people are wearing masks. My thought was if there was actually more seating or more tables, because my understanding is when you're sitting and being served, you can take your mask off, I believe is the way the regulation works. But
Yep.
Standing and gathering, you really should have a mask on and be 6 feet apart.
Right.
So it might be interesting. I don't know if there's a way to get some more furnishing,
Yeah.
but that could
Yeah.
contain people.
And I also thought areas where people could wash their hands.
Right.
Try to or maybe give out some hand sanitizers or something.
Right. Eduardo, you were about to say something? I think you're muted.
You're muted.
I had my mom kept on knocking on the door.
Okay. Yeah.
I think 75 Main was great for a block party. I think they did a wonderful job, just at the wrong time. I mean, if you look at the bar, they were all on top of each other, no face mask. Yes,
That's right.
sitting at the table, of course, you can't wear a face mask while you're eating. But after they were eating, the face masks were not on. People were circulating, watching the show, the belly dance and whatnot. No face mask. I was there, took video too. A little bit afar, my face mask, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I was hanging out. I thought they were great. Just the wrong place, and you cannot control that. You're not going to put out hand sanitizer, give masks. People are drunk. They're having a good time. Either you're going to have a subdued situation with a little bit of music and the bar is closed, or
Right.
you serve a drink and you got to go outside and put your mask on while you're sipping. Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's crazy.
I agree, and that's why I was thinking that the restaurants that had table service, it was more controlled. Like you could go to your table and you could order a drink or food, and you were just at your
75
table.
Main had table service.
Well, then people also were mingling a lot.
Yeah, I mean, where are you going to put the tables? You got to put them outside, and
Well, you could put them in the
they
street.
were all over the place. A lot of tables. I mean,
Yeah, you could put tables in the street, right?
yeah, they had them on the street. I mean, you weren't there, Paul. You should have seen. I mean, it was tables everywhere. I mean,
Right.
Over at the Flying Point, they had tables in front of that too. I mean, the tables everywhere. So it was a big crowd. It's just that they did such a good job with the music and the belly dancer, and that people just congregated there, and there were no face masks. Very few.
Right.
I saw Mark walk by with the dog and everything.
Yes.
And he went by really fast. Whoop, he left.
Yeah, that's right. No,
But I assume he was wearing a face mask.
He was wearing a face mask. He said, let me get out of here.
that's true. The area around 75 Main
dangerous.
was a little out of control.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Those are all sort of things you learn from.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a reason not to do it. It's just a
No.
reason to
I
tinker
think
with
we
it.
should do it.
But I think we should improve it.
Yeah, we should talk to 75 Main and just change the. They still should have the music. I think it was great. I mean, they did a wonderful job. They were the most inventive. The other restaurants, and there were people sitting at the table, but there was no one really having a good time. Nobody really mingling.
Right.
It was okay. But 75 Main was wonderful, but just the wrong period of time. Should have done it last year. Would have been fabulous.
Eldon, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I heard the same comments, and I think that the committee who's been working on it is trying to address that. What we're talking about, which is the masks and the separation.
Yeah, I thought there could also have been a few more tables on Job's Lane.
Mhm.
Well,
You don't have
I
a
would just
restaurant. You only have a driver's seat.
Yes.
yeah. As
You
Eldon
go to
said,
driver's seat.
as Eldon said, I would say I would think it's important to have the business committee take the lead on this. They're the ones who have worked very hard.
Right.
So they're the ones who really should be taking the lead. But I think it was a success from what I heard. So I think they are going to do it on this Saturday for 4th of July. So we'll see what happens again.
Okay. All right. And then last, I just want to mention, and Joe, maybe you want to pick this up. We had, when we did our study, our last zoning study, we had looked at a few different options on the historic district, and I guess Jeff broadly presented an idea to the trustees. Joe, can you just mention what happened, and we'll talk about it at the next meeting?
I did listen to the Zoom meeting of the trustees this past week, and Jeff Broadleaf, a longtime member of the ARB, did chime in, and I believe I did speak with the mayor earlier, and there is discussion of making the historic date a moving 50-year date instead of a permanent date, because just to have to readdress it every 20 years or 30 years, it becomes rather cumbersome. So basically what I guess what the idea would be that the 50-year mark would be just to have a review process. So every house over 50 years old would be subject to a not scrupulous, but just a overview of the demolition by the ARB. Not as rigorous as the Stanford White House on First Neck Lane or something, but obviously they have the extra layer of review. So that's something that was brought up to the trustees by a sitting member of the ARB.
And also the counsel to the ARB, right?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Right. I just want to mention that.
I would encourage all of you to, listen to the meeting. I don't know when exactly he chimed in, but to get to listen to it for yourselves and to see what conclusion everyone wants to arrive at.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to note, Trustee Allen entered a comment on the chat. First of all, I want to thank her for the very hard work she and others have been doing. And she just noted that, all of the things that we were talking about are things that the committee is going to take into account as they look to continue this grand experiment. So I think it's terrific.
Yeah, no, they did a great job.
Yeah, really. Everyone wants to be outside in the current environment. It's a great idea.
Yeah, we were worried also about the rain date, because in the afternoon it started to rain and we weren't sure whether the weather was going to hold.
Right. Always an issue.
Yes.
Okay. I guess. So, any other new business? Okay. Thank you very much. That's the July meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you, Jolie. I think we can stop recording.
I wish we could
Wait,
hug
wait.
you all.
Sorry?
I wish we could hug you all.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. I'm
And
taking it.
happy 4th, everyone.
yes,
Happy
take
Fourth.
care, guys.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Happy 4th.
Even without a parade.
That's right.
Yes. Happy 4th.
Okay.
Okay, happy Fourth.
Okay.